If I told you that tomorrow's drive on Interstate 95 could cost you hundreds of dollars, even if you never speed, never run a red light, and never consider yourself a bad driver, that sounds impossible. But across America, millions of drivers are about to discover that some of the most expensive traffic violations aren't committed by reckless drivers at all. They're committed by ordinary people following habits they've had for years. And here's the shocking part. Many don't realize they've broken a rule until the fine arrives. In this video, we're uncovering the new enforcement trends, highway safety crackdowns, and little-known driving mistakes that could trigger instant penalties on some of America's busiest roads. More importantly, you'll learn how these changes could affect your daily commute, your insurance costs, and even your driving record. But stay with me, because later in this video, we'll reveal the one everyday habit transportation experts say is responsible for countless citations, and millions of drivers still do it every single day. A few months ago, a driver heading to work along a major interstate thought he was doing everything right. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't driving aggressively. He wasn't even running late. Then, in a matter of seconds, a routine action he had performed hundreds of times before resulted in a costly citation he never saw coming. His story isn't unique. In fact, it highlights a much bigger shift happening on American highways right now. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why transportation officials say the future of driving has already arrived and why many drivers are completely unprepared for what's coming next. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Do you think highway rules have become too strict, or do you believe tougher enforcement is making roads safer? Drop your answer in the comments below, too strict or safer roads. I'm curious to see where everyone stands because what we're about to uncover may completely change your perspective. Most drivers think they know the rules of the road. But what we're about to uncover shows that many Americans are unknowingly driving with outdated assumptions. And the first change we're going to discuss is far more widespread than most people realize. To understand what's happening today, we first need to understand how dramatically driving has changed over the last decade. For generations, highway driving followed familiar patterns. Stay near the speed limit, use your turn signals, avoid aggressive driving, pay attention to road signs. The rules were straightforward, but technology changed everything. Smartphones became constant companions. Navigation apps replaced paper maps. Drivers began receiving text messages, emails, social media notifications, and work alerts while behind the wheel. At first, many viewed these distractions as harmless. Transportation experts disagreed. Studies repeatedly showed that taking your eyes off the road for just a few seconds could dramatically increase the risk of collisions. At highway speeds, a vehicle can travel hundreds of feet before a distracted driver even realizes what happened. The consequences were severe. Across the country, traffic agencies reported growing concerns about distracted driving incidents. Safety officials began sounding alarms. Emergency responders saw the results firsthand, and lawmakers started responding. State after state began strengthening enforcement against distracted driving. What once resulted in warnings increasingly became ticketable offenses. For drivers, the change felt sudden. One day, checking a phone at a stoplight seemed routine. The next, it could result in fines, points on a license, or increased insurance costs. But distracted driving is only part of a much larger story. Something else has been happening behind the scenes. America's highways are becoming smarter. Roadside cameras, automated monitoring systems, digital enforcement technologies, and advanced traffic management tools have expanded significantly in recent years. Supporters argue these systems improve safety. Critics worry they increase surveillance. Regardless of perspective, the reality remains the same. The days when traffic violations depended solely on whether a police officer happened to be nearby are rapidly disappearing. Many modern enforcement systems operate around the clock. They don't get tired, they don't take breaks, and they don't miss much. For many drivers, this represents a fundamental shift in how roads are monitored. The impact becomes even greater on major transportation corridors like I-95, because I-95 isn't just another highway. It carries millions of vehicles every year through some of the most densely populated regions in the United States. Commercial trucks transport goods, families travel between states, workers commute to major metropolitan areas, tourists move between destinations. Every day, enormous amounts of traffic flow through this corridor, and with that traffic comes risk. Accidents involving high-speed vehicles often have devastating consequences. Transportation officials know this. That's one reason enforcement efforts have intensified in many areas connected to major interstate systems. But here's where many drivers become vulnerable. Most people assume that traffic laws are relatively uniform. In reality, rules can vary dramatically between states. A driver traveling hundreds of miles along I-95 may pass through multiple jurisdictions in a single trip. Each state may have different regulations regarding cell phone use, hands-free requirements, move-over laws, speed enforcement procedures, construction zone penalties, emergency vehicle protocols, and distracted driving standards. What is perfectly legal in one location could trigger enforcement in another. For travelers unfamiliar with those differences, the risks increase significantly. Imagine driving across several states during a weekend road trip. You're focused on traffic. You're watching GPS directions. You're managing travel schedules. The last thing on your mind is whether a traffic regulation changed recently in a state you're about to enter. Yet that exact situation plays out every day, and it has become one of the biggest challenges facing modern drivers. Transportation experts often describe it as an information gap. The rules change faster than public awareness. Most drivers learn about new enforcement only after receiving a citation or hearing about someone else who did. By then, it's too late. But there is another reason officials are taking highway safety more seriously: the financial cost of crashes. Every year, accidents create enormous economic burdens: medical expenses, vehicle repairs, insurance claims, traffic delays, lost productivity, emergency response costs. The numbers add up quickly. For policymakers, preventing accidents isn't just about saving lives. It's also about reducing these staggering economic consequences. That objective has fueled many of the enforcement initiatives now expanding across the country. Yet despite these efforts, public opinion remains divided. Some drivers believe stricter enforcement is necessary. Others argue the focus should be on education rather than punishment. Both sides make compelling arguments, but one thing is undeniable. The driving environment Americans face today looks very different from the one that existed 10 or 15 years ago. The rules are evolving. Technology is changing enforcement, and awareness is becoming more important than ever. Because the biggest threat may not be reckless driving, it may be assuming nothing has changed. And as we'll discover next, some of the most costly mistakes drivers make aren't the obvious ones. So far, we've talked about the growing changes happening on America's highways, but what comes next is where things become truly important. Because the biggest mistakes drivers make aren't always the obvious ones. In fact, some of the most expensive violations start with habits millions of people repeat every single day without thinking twice, and that's exactly where we're headed next. Now here's where this story takes an unexpected turn, because many of the drivers receiving citations today don't fit the stereotype people imagine. They're not reckless, they're not aggressive, they're not dangerous drivers, they're ordinary people making surprisingly common mistakes. And one particular mistake stands out above all the others. The most surprising thing about modern highway enforcement isn't that penalties exist. It's that many of the violations attracting attention today are committed by ordinary drivers who never considered themselves reckless. They're not racing down highways. They're not weaving aggressively through traffic. They're not trying to break the law. In fact, many are simply following habits they've developed over years of driving. And that's exactly why transportation officials say awareness has become more important than ever. Consider a common scenario. A driver is traveling along Interstate 95 during a busy morning commute. Traffic slows unexpectedly. The vehicle comes to a near stop. When drivers approach police vehicles, ambulances, fire trucks, tow trucks, or other authorized roadside responders, they are often required to move over when safe to do so or significantly reduce speed. The reason becomes obvious when you hear the stories. Tow truck operators struck while helping stranded motorists. Police officers injured during traffic stops. Emergency responders hit while assisting accident victims. These incidents occur more often than many people realize. For transportation officials, stronger enforcement isn't merely about punishment. It's about protecting people whose jobs place them in dangerous positions every day. Yet despite widespread public support for roadside safety, violations continue. Many drivers simply fail to notice emergency vehicles until the last moment. Others underestimate the danger. Some never learn the details of the law in their state, and that's where problems begin. Because ignorance rarely prevents a citation. But there is another factor changing the enforcement landscape: data. Modern transportation agencies collect enormous amounts of information: traffic patterns, accident statistics, congestion trends, high-risk locations, common violation types. Using this information, officials can identify areas where enforcement efforts may have the greatest impact. In other words, enforcement is becoming increasingly strategic. Rather than relying solely on random patrols, resources are often directed toward locations where data suggests safety risks are highest. That approach has supporters and critics. Supporters argue it makes roads safer. Critics worry it creates the perception that drivers are being watched more closely than ever before. Regardless of opinion, the trend is difficult to ignore. Technology and data are reshaping how highways are managed, and nowhere is that transformation more visible than on major interstate corridors. Yet perhaps the biggest misconception among drivers involves financial consequences. Let me ask you something. What's the most common driving habit you see people doing every day that probably shouldn't be happening? Checking phones, following too closely, staying in the passing lane? Drop your answer below. I read these comments, and it will be interesting to see which habit viewers think is creating the biggest safety problem on American highways. Many people view traffic citations as one-time expenses. Pay the fine, move on, problem solved. In reality, the long-term costs can be much larger. Insurance premiums may increase. Commercial drivers may face employment challenges. We're getting closer to the most important insight in this entire video. But before we reveal it, there's one trend. Transportation experts say every driver should understand first, because without this piece of the puzzle, the bigger picture won't make sense. Repeat violations can trigger additional penalties. Some offenses may affect driving records for years. What begins as a seemingly minor mistake can create consequences that extend far beyond the initial citation, and what transportation officials are predicting next may surprise you. If you've learned something valuable so far, take 1 second to hit the like button. Not for me, but because it helps more drivers see information that could potentially save them money, points on their license, and a lot of frustration. Now, what we're about to discuss may be the most important part of this entire video. Everything we've covered so far leads to this moment, because understanding today's rules is important, but understanding where things are heading may be even more valuable. And the future of driving is arriving faster than most people realize. For decades, driving was built around a simple assumption. The driver was responsible for nearly everything, watching the road, reading signs, following traffic laws, making split-second decisions. And while that responsibility still exists today, something fundamental is changing. The roads themselves are becoming smarter, the vehicles are becoming smarter, and the systems monitoring traffic are becoming more advanced than most drivers realize. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually. A new camera here, a new safety system there, a digital sign warning about traffic ahead, an automated alert notifying drivers of hazards miles before they arrive. Each innovation seems small on its own, but together they have created a transportation environment unlike anything previous generations experienced. And nowhere is that evolution more visible than on major corridors such as Interstate 95. Every day, millions of vehicles move through this highway system. Commercial trucks transport critical goods. Families travel between states. Workers commute to major cities. Emergency responders rush toward people who need help. The challenge facing transportation officials is enormous. How do you keep all of those people moving safely? Their answer has increasingly focused on technology, enforcement, and prevention. The philosophy is straightforward. Prevent accidents before they happen, identify risks before they become tragedies, encourage safer behavior before someone gets hurt. From a safety perspective, that approach makes sense. Yet it also creates new expectations for drivers, because the modern driver is expected to stay informed. And that's becoming harder than ever. Traffic laws evolve. State regulations change. New enforcement programs appear. Technology introduces new responsibilities. What was acceptable 5 years ago may not be acceptable today. For many drivers, that's the real challenge. Not bad intentions, not reckless behavior, simply keeping up with change. Consider how dramatically driving has evolved in a single generation. There was a time when paper maps sat folded in glove compartments. Today, navigation systems provide real-time updates. There was a time when drivers relied solely on mirrors and instinct. Today, many vehicles include lane departure warnings, collision alerts, blind spot monitoring, adaptive cruise control, and emergency braking systems. There was a time when traffic enforcement depended almost entirely on visible patrol officers. Today, technology plays a larger role than ever before. The result is a driving environment that rewards awareness. Drivers who stay informed often adapt successfully. Those who rely on outdated assumptions can find themselves caught off guard. And that's where the biggest lesson of this story begins to emerge. Most highway penalties don't happen because drivers intentionally set out to violate rules. They happen because people stop paying attention, not just to the road, but to the changing environment around them. Transportation experts frequently emphasize that awareness is one of the most effective safety tools available, more powerful than expensive gadgets, more valuable than the newest vehicle features, because awareness influences every decision behind the wheel. It affects how quickly a driver reacts, how safely they follow traffic patterns, how effectively they respond to changing conditions, and how well they avoid situations that could lead to enforcement actions or accidents. This principle becomes especially important on long interstate trips. When people drive familiar routes every day, they often enter what psychologists call automatic behavior. If you've learned something valuable so far, take 1 second to hit the like button. Not for me, but because it helps more drivers see information that could potentially save them money, points on their license, and a lot of frustration. Now, what we're about to discuss may be the most important part of this entire video. The brain relies on habit. Attention decreases. Routine takes over. Most of the time, nothing happens until something changes. A new construction zone, a modified traffic pattern, a different speed limit, an emergency vehicle on the shoulder, a law that wasn't there before. Suddenly, habit is no longer enough. Awareness becomes essential. And that's one reason transportation officials continue emphasizing education alongside enforcement. Because ultimately, safer roads require informed drivers. The goal isn't simply issuing citations. The goal is creating an environment where fewer citations are necessary in the first place. Fewer crashes, fewer injuries, fewer tragedies. That objective remains at the heart of nearly every highway safety initiative, yet there is another reason this conversation matters. The future is arriving faster than many people expect. Experts predict that highway systems will continue integrating advanced technologies, connected vehicles, smarter traffic management systems, real-time communication networks, enhanced safety monitoring, artificial intelligence-assisted transportation systems. Many of these developments are already being tested or implemented in various forms. Some will make driving safer, some will raise new questions about privacy and regulation. All of them will require adaptation. The drivers who succeed in this environment will not necessarily be the fastest, or the most experienced, or the most confident. They will be the most informed, because information is becoming one of the most valuable resources a driver can possess. Knowing the rules, understanding the risks, recognizing changes before they create problems. That knowledge can prevent accidents, protect licenses, reduce insurance costs, and perhaps most importantly, keep people safe. So as headlines continue discussing stricter enforcement, new highway initiatives, and evolving traffic regulations, it's worth remembering something important. The purpose of these changes is not simply punishment. At least in theory, the goal is prevention, to reduce crashes, to protect roadside workers, to improve traffic flow, to save lives. Whether every policy succeeds is a debate that will continue. Reasonable people will disagree. But the reality facing drivers is clear. The road system is changing, the expectations are changing, and awareness matters more than ever. So the next time you merge onto I-95 or any highway in America, take a moment to consider how much has changed. The pavement may look familiar, the signs may seem the same, the route may be one you've driven 100 times before, but beneath the surface, a new era of transportation is unfolding, an era shaped by technology, guided by data, driven by safety concerns, and influenced by rules that continue evolving year after year. The drivers who recognize that reality will be better prepared for whatever comes next. Because in the end, the most expensive mistake isn't receiving a ticket, it's assuming the road hasn't changed when it already has. I want to hear your experience. Have you ever received a traffic ticket that completely surprised you? What happened? What was the violation? And looking back, do you think it was justified? Share your story below because your experience might help another driver avoid making the same mistake. As we wrap up, here's the question I want everyone to answer. What do you think the future of driving will look like 10 years from now? More cameras, more technology, more automated enforcement, or safer roads because of these changes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this video useful, share it with a friend or family member who drives regularly on major highways, because the information we've covered today could be worth far more than the cost of a ticket.